Hey everybody, before we start this episode, a quick shout out to our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Perfect RIA. How could it not be brought to you by the Perfect RIA? But if you enjoy these episodes, if you think that Micah and I, or at least Micah, have some great advice to give, head over to our website, theperfectria.com, and download one of our free guides towards making your practice better. So it's not just the things you hear on the podcast, it's the things that you implement. And if you're saying, you know what I'd really like to get in a room with Matt and Mike. I'd really like to ask them my own questions. I'd like to be coached by them. Then send an email to lifestyle@theperfectria.com, and one of our great team members will reach out to you and tell you more about the program. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Perfect RIA podcast. I'm your co-host, Matthew Jarvis, and with me today, special guest, John Barron. As some of you may recall, John has been a guest on the show multiple times. He was the first coach that I ever worked with. John and I worked together for several years. And I give John full credit and inspiration for our prospect process that works so effectively. Most importantly, and John, what we're going to talk about today, is this phrase that you use on a regular basis that I use relentlessly, which is, want to help you make an educated and informed decision about our firm. And that really guides our entire prospect process. So John, thank you so much for that and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, let's talk about that phrase, right? And again, I use it literally with every client, every prospective client, even with existing clients, right? Hey, I want to help you make an educated and informed decision about my firm. And when you first told it to me, John, I thought maybe this is like some clever marketing terminology, right? Like some clever punchline, but it really became like the entire soul of our prospect process.
Great. Well, first off, thanks for listening to me in the first place. Thanks for actually taking what I gave you and turning it into something valuable. No, Matthew, that all came from kind of really looking, kind of examining from an outside view in about how does the ordinary average person go about actually consuming products and services in the marketplace?
Yeah.
What is the process that they would use if they weren't constrained by having to use the process that was imposed upon them by somebody selling something?
Sure.
And if you kind of look and see, and I think this is, if people examine kind of their own particular way of going about things, I think that they'll find there's likely some value or this will resonate, let me put it that way, with kind of the way they do things, which is, if they're being approached to kind of consider something for the first time, well, the first thing I want to know is, how do I decide? How do I determine if this is the right thing for me or not? And the typical person will go through some series of steps, which is designed to do really two things. One is it's designed to give them an education. They don't have to be an expert on what they're shopping for, but they've got to feel like they are informed enough to make it an educated decision. And that's the educated informed. How much education do I need to feel like I can confidently say yes or no in this, and I'm not just being talked into it? And then the second is, okay, well, what does it take for me to have the time that I need to be able to map what I'm learning onto the values, the circumstances, the things that I'm dealing with in life now that would educate me in, is this the right time to make this decision? Should I pull the trigger now? Does it fit with what's going on in my life and, kind of my set of circumstances? So that's where that came from.
John, what's the opposite of that, right? So I love this idea, and we'll talk about that podcast, right? That you've got a super refined process, right? Here are the education points you need to have. We'll talk about it specifically with financial planners, but I feel like that's usually absent in the buy. Like maybe subconsciously we're doing it as consumers, but I feel like if I go to like the car dealership, right? What's their buying process? Buy today, right? Like if I'm in a Toyota dealership, magically Toyota is the solution to all of my problems. And today is the only day to buy, right? That seems to be like the default, right? And I think as Americans, we're jaded to that. You talk about that a lot.
Yeah, and I think people have gotten skeptical over time because they've been talked into things. Their friends ditched them when they were in third grade, or they got left out of being invited to the cool party, and they have the experience of being conned or somehow talked into something. And if you look at the kind of where we've evolved with sales, I'm not educated about other cultures to speak educatedly about them, but at least in this country, sales has become about talking somebody into doing something that they weren't ready to do. And every effort for most salespeople is really kind of wrapped around that. How do I convince them, persuade them, talk them into this, get them to move before they're ready? Which, it's an interesting phenomenon. I want to have an ongoing relationship with this person as a consumer of my product or service. And let's start it out as an adversarial process. That just always seemed a little odd to me.
Yeah. Especially if you're looking for an ongoing relationship.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I guess if you're trying to churn and burn, widgets, whatever. But that's not who we're speaking to here, right? So yeah, if you're going into that, and the thing that comes up in the absence of that is consumers, and you and I have talked about this, they're forced to make decisions on a whim, like whose office looks nicer, who had a better haircut. Maybe that's why you and I are so big into the prospect process. Like you and I have the same haircut,
that's
right?
right.
Like, listen, if you're going to make your decision on hairstyle, like I got to reframe this situation. But for advisors, we see like this, well, I'm the most comprehensive. I'm the most bestest. Like, well, that doesn't mean anything to consumers. And,
that's right.
And so it's like left to a popularity contest, and I'm not going to win that one.
Yeah, and you're left with trying to convince someone not only that they should buy from you, but whatever it is about you that you think is valuable or special in the marketplace is something that they ought to value. And for most people, when you present that way in kind of a convincing conversation, they know you have an agenda. They're skeptical of what you're saying. They're scared about getting talked into something or getting steamrolled or having second thoughts about it afterwards. So they don't have a way to actually assess what you're giving them in the moment. They don't know why they ought to regard that as valuable. Why should that be valuable?
Yeah, that's a great point, especially when we're using jargon. If I'm saying, oh, I'm fee only, or I'm a fiduciary, or I'm comprehensive, like what does that mean? And B, why would I care? And I suppose, and you use the example of going to your dentist office, right? If my dentist tells me, hey, I'm X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't mean anything to me, I got nothing to go off of other than maybe who's got the best price, right? That's where fee compression comes in, right? If I have nothing else to compare to, I know price is an item, right? That's the only thing I can understand. That's what I'm going to go for.
Yeah, and that's really the whole idea behind a prospect process that works is that it takes whatever it is your differentiating value, it puts it front and center, and not just proposes that it ought to be something that people care about, but gives them an education on why does that matter? Why is that valuable? Otherwise, in the absence of the ability to distinguish between providers based upon something that they do that's different, we all become commodities, which means it's price and convenience. Yeah. So, you got those clients that are sniping about your fees all the time or upset that you won't return their phone calls within 10 minutes. That's because what you sold them is a commodity.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. Something that I also like when you and I worked on prospect process together is, and I don't like the word preempting concerns. It was really like pre-educating, right? Which is your entire approach. Like this isn't about, to your earlier point, we're not trying to like trick someone into this. We're trying to educate them. And so one of the pieces you helped us design was we found a list of 10 questions you should ask every financial planner. Now, there's a million of these, right? Just Google it. Yeah. And we took from a common person, we added or adjusted a few of the questions. Then we said, hey, great news. For your convenience, we've put our answers to these questions. Now, again, none of the questions that I like to be facetious about, none of these questions ask about hairstyle. Like I'm not going to win that one. I know I keep going back to that, but there are things that work for us. And I also like a tax planning to be one. What will you do to help me make sure I'm not overpaying the IRS in taxes? Great news. There's our answer. But then if they're interviewing other planners say, well, we don't do anything with tax planning. All of a sudden, I just won the game because I seeded this question.
Right. And it's great. Not only do you seed the question, but you translate it into something that people can appreciate the value of. Most folks, I think when they go to sit down with a financial advisor, I think either assume that that's part of the product line or they don't know that it's something that needs to matter to them. But, when they understand, okay, here's the value of tax planning, you keeping every dollar you can while still paying what you owe to the government. Yep. All of a sudden that's a real factor in your ability to reach your financial goals. It's distinguishing what is it that we do that's different and how do we do it that's different, but also why should you care?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you got to assume that people walk through the door with whatever you think is special about you, I promise is not one of their buying criteria.
Yeah, that's right. We always joke that there's only two people in the world that care about your credentials, you and your mother. That's it. Like nobody else cares about the credentials or the plaques on your wall, right? Because consumers just assume that everybody has those, right? And they don't know what they mean to begin with. I mean, if I go to my doctor and he's got 3 degrees, I really just don't care. Like maybe every doctor does. I don't know. How does that translate to me?
Yeah. And my mom doesn't care about my credentials, so it's just me.
So it's really one person. I'm not going to be honest. Yeah, it's really one person. That's it. John, another great thing that you draw when we're doing the prospect process, and this is something I appreciated when we first started working on through your prospect process, was taking away the pressure of like you have to buy today, because we sort of come in, again, as you mentioned with consumers, we come in assuming that we're going to get the hard sell. Yeah. And something I still use to this day, though I have 2 variations. One is if we're in a meeting in my office, I turn and I look towards the door of the room and I say, you may have noticed on the way in that there's no lock on this door. And they're not really sure what they look. And of course, there's no lock. And I said, that's because this is not a timeshare presentation. And we laugh, right? And I say, listen, before you make a decision to spend $1 or to hire me, whatever the case may be, I want you to go home and sleep on this. Is that okay with you? It's great. We just walked in. I know, but I just want to make sure that you know the elephant in the room. That's it. Can we go ahead and get to work? Yeah, that'd be great. Now in the Zoom meetings, I say, hey, there's a little red button at the bottom of the screen. That's the leave button. And if you click it, I'm going to assume the internet cut out. I'm not going to even take it personally. But if at any point, like you feel this is not for you, just go ahead and hit that button and we're good. So
people are so used to being conned and pressured, they really do assume it's coming. And in the kind of journey that someone goes through between being someone who says, okay, well, maybe I'm interested in some sort of help with this or some sort of product that can serve me in this, there's a place where there's a friction point, which is the resistance to engaging.
Yeah.
So people don't mind, getting your stuff and kind of getting curious and being interested, but there's a point where they've got to, am I going to pick up the phone and schedule an appointment, right?
Yeah.
Where what's in the way of their willingness to engage is that whole concern called, I'm going to get talked into something. I'm going to get pressured. It's going to be awkward. It's going to be painful. And in the end, I'm going to be unhappy. And that walks in the door with them. That's not unique to any provider. That's really what's there in the kind of consciousness of the American buying public. So one of the secrets to really moving somebody along into your product process is making that process, not your services, but making the process itself seem both compelling, like it's worth doing, it's going to be valuable for me, and safe. I'm not going to get pressured. And that's part with the lightness that you bring to that and kind of how you present that, you're achieving. You're making me sitting there now in this call, number one, it's safe for me. And I can see there might be some value for me here, right? I might learn something. Worst case is I'm going to come out of this and I will have learned something. Maybe what I don't want.
Yeah, which is a win for both of us as well. John, I think really one of your areas of brilliance here with this, right, by calling out the elephant in the room, it's made it safe for the prospective client. It's also made it safe for me because before you and I worked together and I would meet with a prospect, like my anxiety would build and build, like, all right, like I'm watching the hours slip away. Like I gotta give the close. Like I gotta ask them to the prom, right?
Right.
And I'm getting more and more nervous. And I'm talking faster and faster and higher pitch. And of course, they sense that they're getting more and more nervous, right? And then half the time I would just chicken out at the end. There'd be like so much tension. I'm like, okay, have a great day. And they're like, what happens next? Well, I'll tell you, I'll send you an email later, right? Like it's a win for both of us to take that to like, listen, here it is. Here's at the end of this call, here's what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And you can let me know yes or no. Now, by the way, as Johnny was pointing out, that was always their right. They always had the right to walk out of the room. They always had the right to say no. But by me identifying it, suddenly like I've given them permission to do what they already had permission to do.
It's a little like a pressure valve on a boiler, It lets the steam out of the room. It lets the heat out of the room. And the likelihood they're going to actually listen to what you say then just went way up because they're not now sitting in their chair waiting for the inevitable pressure point, right? The awkward point where they've got to figure out in my mind, well, I'm listening to Matthew talk to me. I have to figure out how I'm going to turn him down if I get there. And that's what I want to do, which means they just stop listening to you.
No, it's spot on. I think we also have to remember, and I'd love your thoughts here as well, that these are like once in a lifetime decisions. Like maybe someone hires an advisor once or twice or maybe 3 times in their entire life. Even something like buy a car, you're probably only going to do that every 5 or 10 years. It's not like we're skilled with this, right? And so we go into this process. It's very intimidating. We don't know what to ask. We don't know what's going to happen next. And so for someone to kind of just pull back the curtain, like, listen, let me just tell you let me show you how the sausage is made. Like here's the thing. Here's what we're going to do. If that makes sense, we'll keep going. If it doesn't make sense, great news. We can just part ways as friends.
And part of what I really like about that, Matthew, is that they don't know what they should be looking at. God bless them.
And how could they? Yeah.
Yeah. They're not experts in this world. But what they just know is there's something they want for their life. They want their financial future to turn out in a way that allows them to live the lifestyle they want and leave the legacy they're interested in.
Yeah.
And they'll work with you if their perception is, by doing so, I have a better shot of having that turn out. Yeah. And that's ultimately the buying decision. So our job is to give them what they need so they can come to that conclusion, left or right, up or down, yes or no. Here's what's going to happen. Here's what we can do for you. Here's why what we do is really designed to get there. And that's the educational process, right? And then, okay, well, you decide, is this a fit for you?
All right, before we get to more good stuff in this episode, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey everybody, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Belay. You know, the best part of having a virtual assistant from Belay is not the things that they get done that you were already going to do. That is valuable, by the way. It's that list of things that if we're being honest, you need to get to and you're just never going to get it done. Like that doctor's appointment you keep meaning to schedule, or the contractor you need to find for your house to fix that leaky thing, or the flowers you keep meaning to send to your wife. Those are all things that you can give your Belay virtual assistant so that they get done, because we know that, if we're being honest, they're probably not going to get done. Now, how are they going to get done? Because Belay finds virtual assistants, including my own virtual assistant, who are masters at working down task lists. They're masters at taking one step ahead of what you're already thinking, right? Reach out to Belay, text the letters RIA to 55123 to get a free copy of their ebook. More importantly, to get introduced to my good friend Teresa, who's going to see if you're a good fit for a virtual assistant. Not everyone is. And then find a virtual assistant who's perfectly matched to your needs. So text the letters RIA to 55123. And now back to the episode. Yeah, it totally is. I'm just smiling because it brings back a lot of memories of a lot of prospect meetings, a lot of work that we've done together. And part of that is not to ever shortcut your prospect process, right? Because when you transition it from, my goal here is to sell someone something, to, John, as you articulate, my goal here is to educate someone. And if in fact they meet these criteria, they're going to hire me. It makes the process so much better, but it also makes it critical that we not skip steps, right? Sometimes someone will come in, and John, you've talked about this with your coaching, right? And you and I coach for years, and we know a lot of the same people. And sometimes people say, hey, Jarvis said I should call you. Let's get started tomorrow. And you're like,
right.
Oh, there's a process to go through. Skip the process. But the process isn't about closing them. I mean, that's a nice side effect sometimes. The process is like, I got to make sure you're ready for this.
Yeah, and it also gives people, if they actually understand, here's what Matthew does that's unique, or anybody, right? Here's what he's providing me with, and that occurs for me as valuable and worth paying for. Now, I'm assessing your performance against what it was I bought.
Yeah.
Because I didn't buy that you were charming. I didn't buy that you were smart, although you are charming and smart. What I bought was, there's something you're bringing to the table which occurs for me as important for me to get what I want. So it has people be settled, right? It has them not second guess their decision. And it has them be the kind of customer ongoingly that tends to evaluate your performance against what you sold them rather than what they thought they were getting walking in the door.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, right? We always talk about like the failure of all relationships is when reality fails to meet expectations, right? And the same is true for a professional relationship, right? If somebody comes in and we just buzzed past it, like we don't short cryptocurrencies, right? And they're like, all right, it's time to short cryptocurrencies. Oh, shoot. Or if we're talking about taxes, right? Like, all right, how do I get to zero tax bill? We don't do that here, right? And so you got to set that stage. Same with things like, when are you going to call them back? How do you manage email? When do you meet with people? Like, all of these things are, they're all part of that process. But so, John, we've talked about this kind of on a high level, and you and I could go on this for hours, and we have actually. We've spent years working on this together. For our listeners, right? What are small steps? Like, how do they dip their toe into this, right? So if they're going from the default of, if I got to be honest, somebody's coming in, I'm trying to win them over on charm and good looks, or my 400-page financial plan, or whatever the case may be. Like, what are some of the first steps we can take here?
Well, I think the first step, and this is apparently notoriously hard for people. It was hard for me. I think it was hard for you. It's hard for most of the people I talk to. Very few businesses are franchises. In other words, unless you're buying a Pizza Hut, the reason why you went into business is there's something you're interested in providing, either the way you provide it or what you provide, that you perceived a gap in the marketplace, and that you're out to fulfill that. You're out to fill that gap. Identifying what that is. What was it that I saw that I could do differently or better than what was out there? And how do I explain that my business is actually organized to deliver that, right? So the first thing is just getting, what is it that's unique about us? What do we do? It might not be that you're the only person, the one doing it, but you're doing it intentionally, and you're doing it, fill a gap that you perceived in the marketplace. There's something that people deserve, that we think they'd appreciate, that they're not getting and isn't available. Let's provide it. That's number one. The second is, how do you educate your target audience? How do you educate your prospective customer that that's something they ought to care about, right? So you've got to be able to educate them about it in a way that what they come away from is, gosh, boy, the thing that Matthew said about tax planning, boy, I don't know. I don't think I want to work with, I may not want to work with Matthew, but I for sure don't want to work with somebody who doesn't do that. That's now part of my buying criteria.
Yep.
So the second thing is, how do you educate someone in a way that really has them appreciate the value of what you do that's unique? Then the third thing is, how do you conduct that process in a way where you don't put people on the spot, where you actually give them time to kind of work through what they're getting educated about, look and see if this makes sense given the circumstances and the values in their life, so that they can get settled about that that's the right decision. And then if you do that, if you design a process to both educate them and to give them the space to map things onto their values, then you can now make that process safe for them, because you can tell them, here's what's going to happen. We're going to do this. I'm going to educate you about this. You'll come to appreciate this. You'll either think it's the right thing for you or not. In any event, you're not going to get pressured. You're going to get time to think about it. And you're going to come to a conclusion whether this is the right thing for you or not. So if you can identify the gap that you're filling, if you can find a way to educate people about the value, why they ought to care about what you're providing that's unique, and then do it in a way that gives them the space to really kind of think through it, then it makes it possible. Those three things make it possible to do the fourth thing, which is, I have a process that you're going to like.
Now, for those of you taking notes at home, which should be all of you, right? Here's where this task that sounds easy on the surface is going to get incredibly difficult. John, this is an exercise that had me hit my head against the phone on many occasions as we talked, which is anything you wrote down on that process that I can find on every single other financial advisor's website doesn't count, right? So if you say, we operate with integrity, unless someone is saying the opposite of that, you lose. It's like saying you have electricity. Like, guess what? In our office at Jarvis Financial, we have electricity. No one's going to care, right? So, and the reason I mention it's fun to scoff at is a lot of us, myself included, we're hardworking. We look out for your best interests. We're going to take care of you. Consumers assumed that was, they're like, wait, why do you have to mention this? Like, isn't that a given? Like, you're going to operate. Should I be asking this? Like, what are you trying to hide? Right. So it is going deeper and saying, all right, what is it that we're offering to our very narrow market that no one else is offering, at least not in this way?
Kind of the interesting thing in this world, Matthew, is that, as a business coach, there are a million business coaches, that I give people coaching. So does everyone, right? Sometimes you are offering a service which is unique. Like there could be something about tax planning that not everybody's doing that really gives you a competitive advantage. But for a lot of us in these kind of service industries, it's not so much what you do, but how you do it. How do we go about delivering that? So, I don't want to leave people with what they're trying to identify as what product are we offering that not everybody else offers, because it's going to be very difficult to find in this world, right?
Yeah.
It's just, how do you go about it to make sure something gets delivered that you perceive as not ordinarily being delivered by your competition?
I always like to rig games so that I can win, right? So sometimes for that, like if I try to say like, I would never say I'm the best tax planner in the entire universe. Guaranteed there are hundreds, thousands, millions, who knows, they're better than I am. But when I work in my demographic, in my niche, in my geographic area, I can say with great confidence, like, hey, listen, nobody does tax planning the way that I do it in this area, right? Or if you're working with a certain retiree, our good friend Micah, right? Hey, nobody does federal benefits like we do federal benefits. Really, what does that mean? And it kind of opens the door for that. But again, to your point, John, I appreciate you mentioning this. You do not have to be the best objectively financial planner in the entire universe in order to have a unique selling proposition, right? You have, I'm the best in this area, or for people who call me, I'm the best, right? There's ways to refine that down, but it does still have to be something, right?
Well, it's got to be something that people can actually get the value of. Like it's a differentiator. Like it really does separate you. It could be the way you communicate. It could be how you do your surge or client review meetings. It could be how you include family members.
So you mentioned it, again, people can go back and rewind. They can listen to those 4 steps. And it's really, once you've done those 4, then I like to go look and just at one piece at a time. Sometimes it's easy to get stuck and say, hey, I got to draw the whole thing from scratch. That would be nice. If you had time for that, you can hire John and he'll work you through that and it'll be great, right? You can also, whether you hire John or not, look at one piece at a time. Something, John, that you and I worked on together, and I'm a huge advocate for, is when you email a prospect telling them, hey, your meeting's on Thursday, that in itself is not value, right? It's like the smallest little bit of value. And you trained me on this, John, is, hey, attached to this email, you will find X. And the reason we included X is Y. Like attaches the 10 questions. And the reason we include that is most people don't know what questions to ask. We wanted to make sure you knew whether you're interviewing us or someone else. Suddenly this email went from the same thing I get from everyone else to, holy smokes, this is like a lot of value. And you're really like laying it out on the table.
You're asking for people's time, energy, and attention. You're asking them to invest something in this process. Every step of the process has got to be valuable for them, or they're out.
Yeah. Yeah, or at least they're harder to get in, right? And so then you're victim to, we run into Fisher Investments a lot, being up in the Northwest, right? Phenomenal marketing machine, phenomenal sales machine, buy until you die, right? But if you're coming up against those and you're trying to say like, hey, we have the best shop, like you're going to lose because they have these endless resources. They're going to bury you alive. But if you wanted to use hey, listen, the people that work with us don't want to have to call an 800 number and be the 1,000th client for that advisor. Like the kind of people that work with us don't like that. They want to like know us by name and we know them by name. Cool. Because if they say like, actually, I don't care, great, then you should call Fisher Investments or Vanguard or whomever.
That's right.
Like, actually, I'm old fashioned. I want to look somebody in the eyeballs because this is my life savings. Okay, well, you might be in the right place then. That's what we do. And so it doesn't have to be this crazy dramatic thing. Like we're the only ones that know about Bahama Trust or something like that.
Right. Yeah. I like to use the example of BMW, the ultimate driving machine. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. The folks from Porsche, Maserati, Lamborghini, Ferrari might have something to say about that. But
yeah, no kidding.
They said it first.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. John, obviously we could go for hours on this as we have in the past. What are some action items that our listeners can take, right? So everybody listening who's saying, boy, I would really love my prospect process to be more dialed in. What are kind of next steps they could take?
So I think it goes back to what we talked about before. It really does make a difference to identify how you're operating in the marketplace that not everybody else is doing. Because in the absence of an ability to distinguish one provider for another, it really does come down to price and convenience. And that they're going to, those people are not going to be happy and they're not going to be good customers. No. Take the time and the trouble to see if you can figure out, and if you look, it's a little bit, on one hand, it's a little bit like looking at the back of your eyeball. It's not easy to do, but nobody's business was put together haphazardly and disorganized. It was all designed to provide something. So if you just kind of step back and go, well, what did we design this to provide? It's probably right there.
Yeah.
Then figure out how do we educate people about this in a way that it becomes part of their buying criteria. It seems like something they can't live without. They really do get the value of it. And for those people, and it's not going to be valuable for everybody, but like you said, Fisher, right? If you want to get married, great. If you want to have actual personal contact, you're going to be better off with us, right? So how do we say it so that it appeals to people for whom that kind of a value would be paramount? And then how do we design this in a way that is easy and safe for people to engage in, gives them the time they need, and lets them come to their own conclusion? You'll know you've gotten there if you can say to people with a straight face, don't trust us, trust yourself.
Boy, that's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, that's really like grasshopper, you've kind of now arrived thing, right? Because it feels like, same when you talk about fees, right? I always mentioned, hey, listen, every quarter you're going to see our fee. And I learned this from you, John, as well. You're like, hey, listen, every period, I'm going to ask you if you want to go for another period of time. And so sometimes we think like, well, I can't draw that much attention to my fees, but the attention's already there. Like they know you're getting paid, right? Unless you're doing something deceptive. I'm just calling out like, great news. Every quarter you'll see my fee and you'll look at it and I'll look at it. And we'll both say, hey, does it make sense? Like the value I'm getting, does it exceed the fee I'm paying? And if it does, great news. We keep going. And as soon as it doesn't, we part ways as friends. And then I add in there's a gesture of good faith. I'll refund my last quarter's fee to help you get, find a new place. Take away all the pressure. Like, great, I'll work with Jarvis and I'll fire him as soon as I want. Now, again, that was their right to begin with. Yeah. But now I'm the hero here. I've also, and this is great for the prospect process, but I've also treated them the way I want to be treated. Yes. Right. I don't want to be stuck in a contract. I don't want to think like, oh, I bought this thing and now I can't get rid of it. No, you have to deliver value constantly. Perfect. That's what I want.
Yeah, it's great. And Matthew, what's kind of in the background of what you're talking about in your process is really you're assisting somebody on a journey. You're like a Sherpa or a guide. Yes. This is a person that's trying to figure out what's right for them to do. So you can either try and talk them into that you're the right answer, or what you can do is you can guide them down a pathway where they come to that conclusion on their own. It makes a completely different kind of customer. Yeah, it does. If I talk them into it, so to speak, then I've got to forever keep them talked into it. Right. Where if that was their decision, hey, I would have to talk them out of it. Like I'd have to screw it up, right? For it to go the other way. Yeah, and now you've got somebody who you've talked into it and they resent you for having done it. And they're a client. That's right. It's an adversarial relationship. Again, they hate this, Bobby talked me into it. John, how do people learn more about you? And if they say, boy, I really want to work with John, he's got this stuff figured out, like how do they reach out to you, John? I'm pretty easy to connect with on LinkedIn is probably the fastest way. Perfect. I'm there just under my name, John Barron. It's Apollo Coaching and Consulting. And I've also got a website that they can find. And perfect. I'm assuming, Matthew, we can leave them the link in the podcast. Yep, we'll put it all in the show notes. Of course, you can also, I would recommend, go back and listen to the other episodes that John and you and I have done together. They're all phenomenal. I go back and listen to them because I draw so much from our conversations. It's really an honor to have you on the show. So
everybody, you've got your marching orders, right? You can dream about a prospect process that works, or you can make it work. And it's work, right, John? And you mentioned this. It's real work to create this. Yeah, you really got to commit to it. I think there was definitely times where you were guiding me and there was times you were dragging me, but we made it to the top of the mountain, kicking and screaming sometimes. But so everybody go and take action. John, thank you so much for your wisdom and your insights. And for all of our listeners, until next time, happy planning. Hey, before you leave, a quick word from our sponsors. Hey, everybody, I want you to take a quick look around your office, and on your desk, there should be the Retirement Tax Services Desktop Tax Guide. And if it's not there, or if it's not current, meaning you didn't download it in the last month, go to retirementtaxservices.com and download the Desktop Tax Guide. This is a must-have resource for every financial advisor committed to tax planning.
Information designed to change lives. Financial planning can make you thrive. Start today, don't think twice.